There are punishments that vanish into the shadows of history, forgotten, denied, or softened by time. But then there are those so savage, so spectacularly cruel, that even centuries later they make the blood run cold. Blowing from a gun was one of them, a method so shocking that it seems closer to nightmare than reality. It was used not by pirates or bandits, but by the British Empire itself. It's strange to think that a weapon meant for war could become a tool for justice, or rather, vengeance. The first known mentions of blowing from a gun date back to the early 1500s. Portuguese explorer Francisco de Almeida, during his brutal campaigns in India around 1509, is said to have used the method to execute rebels. His compatriot, Francisco Barreto, allegedly followed suit in Mozambique. They tied prisoners to the mouths of cannons. When the gun fired, the human body, frail and unarmored, was reduced to nothing but dust, fragments, and silence. An eyewitness once described it in grotesque detail. The head shoots up 40 or 50 feet into the air, the arms fly off right and left, the legs drop beneath the muzzle, the body gone, not a trace remains. It was horror disguised as authority. And when the British Empire came to dominate the Indian subcontinent, it inherited not only land and wealth, but also this macabre tradition. The British in India faced rebellion after rebellion. The sepoys, Indian soldiers serving under British command, were restless, humiliated, and angry. When the Great Indian Rebellion of 1857 erupted, the British responded with sheer terror. They used blowing from a gun, not only as punishment, but as spectacle. It was meant to erase fear from the British ranks and plant it deep in the hearts of the colonized. On June 8, 1857, 2 sepoys from the 35th Light Infantry were executed by cannon in front of their comrades. A few days later, on June 10th, in Ludhiana and Peshawar, 40 men from the 54th Regiment met the same fate. By the 13th of June, 10 more were blown apart in Firozpur. The reports continue, methodical and almost bureaucratic. June 26th, Aurangabad, 1 blown from a gun, 1 hanged, 3 shot. July 8th, Jhelum, captured rebels, assumed blown away. September 5th, Setara, 6 blown away. September 17th, Multan, 1 blown away, 121 executed. September 23rd, Karachi, 1 blown away, 7 hanged, 20 deported. By November 1857, hundreds had died this way. Approximate estimates suggest that 44 men were executed by cannon in just a few months, though some historians believe the real number was higher. To the colonial authorities, this wasn't murder. It was discipline. They argued it was a necessary deterrent, a way to keep sepoys and civilians alike from rebelling again. But beneath that cold reasoning was something darker. Blowing from a gun didn't just kill the body. It destroyed it completely. In Hindu belief, cremation of the body was essential for the soul's release. By obliterating a man's body, the British ensured his spiritual destruction too. They knew this. They used it. It wasn't just an execution, it was psychological warfare. Executions were public. Thousands gathered, soldiers, villagers, even children. The condemned were dragged forward, tied across the cannon's mouth, their spines pressed against the cold iron. A bugle call, a flash, a sound like thunder. Then silence. A British officer wrote of one such scene. When a gun fired, his limbs flew high. The air was filled with smoke, and for a moment, we stood in stunned quiet. Then the crowd wailed, and I wished I had not watched. Sometimes it went wrong. Cannons misfired. A soldier once slipped from his bindings, his arm catching fire as the gun went off. A British sergeant tried to shoot him with a pistol. 3 times the cap misfired. Finally, a rifle bullet ended his life. The witness said, "I have seen death in all its forms, but never anything like that man's end." Even worse, during one execution, the cannons were mistakenly loaded with grape shot instead of blanks. When fired, the shrapnel ripped through the onlookers. Civilians lost limbs. Soldiers were struck by flying fragments of bone and flesh. Death didn't stop with the condemned. The Indian Rebellion wasn't the first time the method appeared. In 1764, a native officer who plotted to defect to the enemy was blown from a gun before his entire regiment. The lesson was simple: betrayal equals obliteration. And in 1798, during a mutiny among British troops themselves, one of their own, a European soldier, was executed the same way. The only known case of a British man blown from a gun by British hands. The irony didn't escape those who witnessed it. Empire demanded obedience, and when obedience failed, it devoured even its own. In 1806, the Vellore Mutiny broke out. Indian soldiers rose against British officers, killing several while they slept. The response was immediate and merciless. 6 men were executed by cannon fire. By the time the rebellion of 1857 came, blowing from a gun was already woven into the fabric of imperial punishment. It wasn't new. It was inherited. The British had taken an old Mughal form of execution, once used for traitors and thieves, and turned it into a symbol of imperial terror. Even after the rebellion was crushed, the practice continued. In 1871, 65 Sikh rebels were executed this way, and elsewhere, the method lingered like a ghost. The Emir of Afghanistan, during the 1880s, was notorious for using cannons to execute political enemies. Reports from the time claim as many as 5,000 people a year were killed this way, an almost unimaginable number. Whether inflated or not, the stories carried the same theme: the power of fear. In the 1920s, some tribal leaders still used it to crush rivals, inspired, ironically, by the very empire that once condemned Eastern barbarity. The British had brought the world their civilization, their order, their justice, and yet they left behind this. Eyewitnesses often wrote that vultures would circle above the field moments before an execution. They knew what was coming. When the cannon fired, the air filled with a strange rain, blood, bone, and smoke. Dogs rushed forward. Birds descended. What was left of a man was gone within minutes. Even hardened officers admitted nightmares. One soldier wrote home that he could still hear the sound months later, that every thunderclap reminded him of that dreadful day in Peshawar. The British understood power, not just the kind that came from armies and rifles, but the kind born from fear. By using this punishment, they sent a message to every village, every regiment. Resistance means obliteration. There will be no martyrdom, no funeral, no body to mourn. And for the Indian population, already fractured by class and religion, this message worked, at least for a time. It's no coincidence that the method was used publicly, always in front of others. It was theater, terror, and domination rolled into one. History likes to portray the British Empire as enlightened, builders of railways, writers of law codes, bringers of civilization. But moments like this strip away the veneer. Blowing from a gun wasn't civilization. It was annihilation. It showed what happens when authority becomes absolute, when one people decides another is less than human. The cannon, once aimed outward at enemies, turned inward on the colonized, and sometimes on the empire's own conscience. It's easy to think of it as the past, but look closely and you see the same logic today. The idea that fear can control, that brutality can bring order. After the 19th century, the method faded from official use. No empire wanted its name attached to such barbarity. Yet in Afghanistan, in isolated uprisings, and even whispered in the stories of British veterans, it survived as a ghost of empire, a symbol of what unchecked power can do. And maybe that's the true horror of it, not just the bodies blown apart, but the cold reasoning behind it. The certainty that this was justice. The British Empire didn't invent cruelty, but it perfected the machinery that allowed it to operate cleanly, legally, publicly. A cannon, a man, a crowd, and silence afterward. Some say history is written by the victors. But what if the victors were the ones who turned human beings into cannon smoke? Blowing from a gun, maybe centuries behind us, but the mindset that allowed it? That's the question that still hangs in the air. Will we really be so different today if we thought fear could keep us safe?